Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 129. Today in the Amateur Traveler, we talk about Thailand. Learn about markets and temples, cooking classes, and bathing with elephants. Today in the Amateur Traveler.
Cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into the interview today, I have a couple news stories for you. The first story I saw this week that amused me was a story I saw on the unofficial Apple weblog. As you know, I am a Mac user, and this one is a Mac-related travel story. Programmer Michael Nygaard, while passing through the airport security recently, was pulled aside and made to sit in the holding area. He watched as a gaggle of TSA workers examined his things, especially his laptop. "There's no drive," said one, "and no ports in the back. It is a couple of lines where the drive should be," she continued. As you probably guessed, Michael's MacBook Air had them all baffled. Fortunately, a younger member of the team eventually arrived and explained that it's not a device, but a computer with a solid-state hard drive. The second news story, and again something that amused me but has a moral. A couple in Melbourne, Australia returned home from vacation to discover the police holding a news conference at their house about their suspicious disappearance. William and Heather Ostall's daughter Angela had not seen or heard from their parents since Thursday. She went to their house and discovered the front door was unlocked, their car was gone, and their dog was home alone. She called the police and reported her parents missing. So I think the moral there is, remember to tell your relatives when you go on vacation. For links to both of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome Eric from Kansas City, who's come to talk to us about Thailand. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, first of all, Thailand. What took you to Thailand? An airplane, obviously, but why did you go to Thailand?
Well, my wife and I really enjoy travel, and we've traveled in Western Europe a good bit, and we decided we wanted to go someplace really different. And the first thing that kind of came to mind was Asia. I've always wanted to go to Asia. And we picked Thailand really, honestly, because we had heard that it was one of the easier places to go for your first time in Asia. And also the fact that it's really affordable. We had something to do with it as well. Okay. And so really those are the main reasons. We just kind of settled on Thailand after considering those two things.
Okay. And let's jump right in. What was the highlight of the trip for you?
I would say the highlight of the trip would probably have to be the Elephant Nature Park that we did, and also the cooking class in Chiang Mai. We really enjoyed Chiang Mai more than Bangkok. Bangkok is really interesting and has a lot of things to see, but Chiang Mai was a little more relaxed and a little nicer, really.
And where all did you get in Thailand? I probably should have started with an itinerary.
Well, we flew into Bangkok and we stayed there for 6 nights, and then we went up to Chiang Mai, which is a city up in the north in the mountains.
Sure.
And we stayed there for 6 nights as well.
Okay. So let's start in what you saw in Bangkok. So as people go to Bangkok, what would you recommend that they spend their time doing?
Well, we did the usual thing. We went to see the Grand Palace, which is really nice. It was really crowded when we were there, but it was still really interesting. There's not a lot of parts of it that are open, but one of the parts that is open is Wat Phra Kiao, I believe it's pronounced. It is the temple that is in the Grand Palace. That's where the Emerald Buddha is.
Okay.
So that was kind of interesting.
So the king is still living in the Grand Palace, is why it's not open?
No, he doesn't live in this palace anymore. He lives in another palace to the north.
Okay.
But I think there is still a good bit of the government seat there. So a lot of it is close to the public. And it was really interesting when we were there because the king's sister had recently died. And so the day we were there were huge numbers of people, mostly women, wearing black for mourning, presumably. Because we learned later by watching the news and kind of figuring it out, because obviously we don't speak Thai, that there was some kind of ceremony for her going on that day in the Grand Palace, and that's why all these people were there. Another very interesting thing we saw in Bangkok was Wat Po, which is just south of the Grand Palace. That is where the giant reclining Buddha is.
Uh-huh.
That's very neat, because you go there and you can see it, and one of the fun things is behind it, there's on his feet are inscribed in mother of pearl the 108 auspicious signs of the Buddha. And so behind that are 108 pots, and you go and you make a donation and you get your little cup of, they're called satangs. They're basically Thailand's pennies, and they're worth so little. I never saw one used outside of this context, but you get your little cup of pennies, or satangs, and you go and you put one in each of the 108 pots for good luck and also to make merit. So that was kind of fun. And then if you cross the river from that area, you get to Wat Arun, which is one of the older temples, I believe, in Bangkok, and that was very neat because it's very beautifully decorated. It's decorated with pieces of porcelain, plates and stuff that have been broken and formed into patterns, so they're formed into flowers and all kinds of beautiful decoration, and those are really some of the highlights. We also went to the National Museum. Parts of it are a little old, I mean, it's a little run down, but we specifically went there on a day when there was a free English-speaking tour.
Okay.
So that was really neat, and if people do go, I recommend they take this tour because it was very interesting and gave you a lot of background on the history of the country.
Now, you mentioned not speaking Thai. You were traveling independently? You weren't with a tour?
Yes, we were independently.
And how did
I did learn a little bit.
Okay. And how did that work out in terms of getting
It worked out pretty well. In Bangkok, transportation can be a little bit of a challenge. There's the Sky Train, which is basically like an elevated train like the L in Chicago.
Right.
And any place where that goes is fantastic. It's just wonderful. It's air-conditioned, and it's really affordable. And if you're over near the river, you can take the river taxis, which is also really fun. That's one of the funnest things we did, actually, was taking these river taxis. But in other places, it can be a little bit of a challenge. For the most part, I found the Thai people to be exceptionally honest. It was really amazing. But I think some of the taxi drivers and tuk-tuk drivers can be, they're going to try to sell you things. They're going to try to take you to their friend's restaurant, take you to a tailor, and blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
But as long as you stay somewhere where you can get to the SkyTrain or the river, it's really not a problem. It's not the most pedestrian-friendly city I've ever been to.
Okay.
Walking can be a little challenging. It's not as bad as people make it out, but I mean, there's some air pollution, and sometimes there's not sidewalks and things like that, but it's not really that big of a deal. So you can get around. You just got to be careful.
What time of year were you there?
We were there at the end of January,
Okay.
in Bangkok at the end of January, and in Chiang Mai at the beginning of February. So it's at the very end of the cool season, but it was still ridiculously hot. I was really surprised at how hot it was. With the heat index, it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit in Bangkok almost every day.
And that's towards the end of the cool season?
Yes.
Okay.
I would recommend people go there in December if they're going to go.
Okay. And do you know offhand, in the middle of the cool season, how cool it is? Then it's like 90 or something? Or
I think like high 80s, mid 80s.
Okay.
The coolest.
Well, that's not bad.
It's only like 14 degrees above the equator, so it's
Sure.
never going to get really cold.
The one thing I wondered about is I've heard from other travelers to Thailand about some of the Thai taboos to avoid. Did you run into any of the things like not patting somebody on the head, or be careful where you point your feet when you're sitting, or keeping your head lower than a Buddha as you enter a room? Did you run into some of those?
We didn't really run into them because I was aware of them, so I was kind of really careful not to do any of those things.
I want to say that there were 4, and then I'm missing one, too.
Well, the really big one is do not criticize the king of the royal family.
Okay, all right.
That and disrespecting the Buddha, from what I read, are really kind of the two things that are going to get you in trouble in the country.
Okay.
Because they really love the king. It's amazing. There are pictures of him just everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere you go, there's pictures of him, and they just really seem to love him a lot. So you really want to be careful about that. And you don't like point your feet at the Buddha or anything like that. But other than that, they're really very easygoing. I think they're very understanding of foreigners there.
Mm-hmm.
So it really wasn't a problem. But like I said, we do a lot of research before I go to places, so I kind of knew about those things, so I was kind of careful not to do any of them.
Okay. And then let's go up to Chiang Mai here a bit. You went up to Chiang Mai also then for 6 days or so, you said?
Yeah, 6 nights.
6 nights. And What did you do while you were in Chiang Mai?
We really liked Chiang Mai a lot. It's up in the north. It was a lot cooler. The weather was very pleasant while we were there. That's where the Elephant Nature Park was.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really recommend this enough. It was really one of the most wonderful things we've ever done. It's a lot different from your usual elephant park. It's not kind of the circusy ones where they make them do tricks and you ride them and all that.
Okay.
It was founded by a woman named Lex, who's kind of dedicated her life to saving Asian elephants and kind of educating people on the plight of the Asian elephants. So the way it works is they pick you up at your hotel and you stop by the market on the way there and you load up tons and tons of watermelons and all these fruits and stuff for the elephants. And you go there and you feed the elephants, and that's really fun. There's like a little feeding platform. It's like a kind of a covered porch, basically. All the elephants come up, and each elephant has its own basket. There are 31 elephants. Each elephant has its own basket. And you feed the elephants, and each basket has what that elephant likes. So if they just like watermelon or squash or whatever, then you feed the elephants. And that was really fun. You kind of take it right out of your hand and eat it, and you get to pet them a little bit while you're doing that. And then you have a big lunch. Like I say, you feed the elephants and you feed the people. And then after that, you go down to bathe the elephants in the river. And this is really neat. The mahouts take the elephants down into the river, and the park is right on the river. And they take the elephants down the river, and they kind of lay down, and you get your bucket and your big scrub brush, and you go into the water with the elephant, and you kind of scrub them down and splash water on them, and the elephants really seem to enjoy it. And it's a really neat experience because you're really right there with them.
How many different tourists, you say there's about, was it 30 elephants?
31 elephants, I believe, yes.
Okay, and how many different tourists were there then when you were there?
I think they said that day that there were about 50 people.
Okay.
They kind of break them into groups.
Uh-huh.
And there are also lots of people that go and volunteer there for periods like up to a month.
Huh.
Where they stay there. I think that would probably be a really rewarding experience. Next, show you a video about the plight of the elephant and how they're broken so they can do little tricks and stuff.
Uh-huh.
At the other camps, the elephants are like chained up when they're not working. But here they just kind of wander around, and you stay on the viewing platform. They just kind of form their own family groups, and they just kind of do their own thing.
And are these elephants that were rescued, that were previous work elephants, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they're all elephants that were rescued. There's some of them that have been damaged. There's one that had its foot blown up by a mine, and it was kind of crippled. And there was the one we fed had apparently been fed amphetamines by one of its previous owners so that it could work basically 24 hours a day. It still moved really slowly and was really slow eating, like everybody else was done, and we were still eating. So they're all the ones that she has rescued. And in addition to the elephants, there's like 50 dogs running around, and there's some cats and some water buffalo and some cattle. It's just kind of a menagerie. Can really highly recommend it.
Okay.
It's actually fairly expensive for Thailand. I think it was $2,500 baht a person, so it's $75-$80 a person.
Okay.
But I really can't recommend it highly enough. It's an extremely rewarding experience. And I think it's good for people to see kind of the harm that some of the other places are doing. And they really reserved a lot of their scorn for the people who take the elephants into the major cities and beg with them. They really had nothing good to say about those people because it's really bad for the elephants, obviously, and they're often involved in traffic accidents and things like that. So it's a really rewarding experience. I would highly recommend people do it. It's called Elephant Nature Park.
And you said that this was fairly expensive for Thailand. Twice we've talked about Thailand being a relatively inexpensive destination. Can you give us some idea of what makes it so inexpensive? Obviously, getting there is fairly expensive.
Yeah, getting there is really expensive, but, actually a lot less affordable than it used to be with the dollar and the terrible state that it's in. But even so, the food is really affordable. An expensive meal in kind of a more tourist-oriented restaurant would be the equivalent of like $15, basically.
Okay.
And that would be with a beer and a couple of, total for two of us.
Okay.
And that would be with a beer and a couple of pineapple shakes and 3 entrees, and and then a cheap meal would be $7 to $8.
Okay.
And you can eat really cheap if you want to eat something from a street vendor for $1, basically.
Right.
So that's pretty affordable. The hotels are fairly affordable, although obviously it's like any place else. You can spend a fortune. But you can get a really nice hotel for you, $50 a night. Our hotel we stayed in Chiang Mai, I feel that I should mention this place because it was so nice. It's called Ban Orapin, Baanorapin, and it's like a bed and breakfast. And this place was just fantastic. We had a junior suite that was 2 large rooms and a big bathroom, and it worked out to about $67 a night, and it included a really good breakfast. So it was just a really nice place. It was kind of across the river outside the main part of town,
Uh-huh.
But it was like a couple-minute walk down to a pedestrian footbridge that took you over the river. Then you were right there at a market. So overall, it's actually very affordable. There's a lot of really cheap shopping. If you like to shop, Thailand is really the place for you to go because I've never seen more opportunities to buy things in my life. Particularly in Bangkok. When we were in Bangkok, we stayed in more of the shopping area. So there are probably over half a dozen gigantic malls within about 10 minutes of where we were. I mean, we went to MBK Mall, which is one of the larger ones, a 7-story mall. It was just enormous.
And when you say shopping, I know a lot of electronics are coming from Thailand now. Are you shopping for that sort of things or for handicrafts, or what kind of things were you shopping for? Or what kind of things
there's a lot of handicrafts, and there's a lot of cloth, a lot of silk. The silk industry was kind of revived by an American ex-OSS agent named Jim Thompson, who was kind of a legendary figure in the history of Bangkok. So there's a lot of like silks and a lot of handicrafts from the people in the north and a lot of things like that. Mentioning that, going back to Bangkok, one of the other things we did was to go to the Chatuchak Weekend Market, which is this gigantic market in Bangkok. Some people say it's the largest market in Asia. I don't know about that, but it's enormous. I think it's between 8,000 and 12,000 stalls, depending on who you ask. I think it covers like 35 acres. I mean, it's just staggeringly enormous. And basically anything that can be for sale on the planet, I think, is there somewhere if you can find it. It was pretty amazing.
And what did you come home with?
Man, my wife bought a lot more stuff than I did. I got a painting, actually, a small 1-foot square painting by a guy at the market, and I got a little kind of robot warrior souvenir guy, and I got myself a spatula at a nice spatula for my wok after I took the cooking class.
And we talked about where you stayed and how inexpensive the food was also. What kind of food, though, did you find that, obviously you're probably eating Thai food, but what did you really find that you liked?
One of my favorite things is that I really like all the various curries. And I like duck, which is not really easy to get in the United States, especially if you don't hunt. So I ate a lot of duck with red curry. And I'm also a huge fan of fried rice, so I ate a lot of pineapple fried rice.
Okay.
And it's also just fun to just kind of pick things as well. Pick something that sounds interesting and order it. The food was pretty uniformly excellent, I must say.
And you were predominantly eating in restaurants or restaurants targeting tourists, or did you actually eat from the street vendors some?
I didn't eat a lot of food from the street vendors. We did eat at restaurants. We tried to stay away from the really touristy ones. We just would kind of pick them at random, really, just kind of run upon them and go in.
Okay.
We ate a lot of really small restaurants that were really good, but I didn't really have like a list of restaurants that I wanted to try.
Okay.
So we just kind of like to wander around and just find them as we wander around.
And then you said you did a lot of research before your trip, which I always love getting people on who've done their homework. So what did you find that the guidebooks recommended that was a disappointment?
I would have to say that probably the Chatuchak Weekend Market. I don't know if I would go so far as to say it was a disappointment, but I'm kind of like the stereotypical guy, which I'm just really not that interested in shopping. So to me, it was kind of like, oh great, more shopping. And, that's like all there is. And it was kind of fun for a while to walk around and see 40 stalls selling puppies. A woman blow-drying a puppy with a hairdryer, that was kind of neat. There was an area for sale where they were selling fighting roosters, which I got a great photograph of. And to my regret, I didn't ask the guy how much they cost, because now I'm still curious as to how much one of them would have cost. But to me, after a while,
though, anyway, so
yeah, I wouldn't think so. Yeah, but to me, after a while, it's like, okay, more shopping. How much really shopping do I need?
Okay.
Also, the Grand Palace, I definitely would not discourage people from seeing it, but it's very crowded, and for Bangkok, it's fairly expensive as well at $250 per person, which is still really cheap and
that's
really
about
not a big
$750 or so.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really not a big deal.
Okay.
But I would definitely say people should go see it, but I don't think you need to spend an entire day exploring it. Once you wander around some and seen the Emerald Buddha, we had as much fun just kind of wandering around. Just pick a random lot and just go in and look around, and there's always some kind of neat things to see there.
And then what resources were you using for your research?
I did a lot of just typical internet stuff. I used TripAdvisor quite a bit.
So you were getting more personal recommendations than with TripAdvisor for people who aren't familiar with that.
And I also like WikiTravel, which is kind of a split from Wikipedia.
We actually haven't talked about WikiTravel that much. Glad you mentioned that. Yeah, that's a good place to get travel information.
Yeah, and I would also just Google something and see what came up for it.
Sure. And then are there things that you discovered when you were there that you hadn't known about before you went that were really good experiences?
I think just the wandering around and finding temples to go in and look around.
Uh-huh.
It's not a problem to just go in and kind of look around. They're all open for people to go into. And just finding the little restaurants, and especially in Chiang Mai, just wandering around the old city.
Okay.
I actually forgot about another really huge highlight that I would really like to tell people about. One of the things we scheduled our trip around was to go see in Chiang Mai every year in early February. They have a flower festival.
Oh, okay.
And so we scheduled our trip around to see this. And as part of the flower festival, there is a huge flower festival parade. And it was really one of the most amazing things we've ever experienced. Because in many ways it was very similar to a parade here, but then it would just be completely different. So there were like marching bands, and it was funny because there would be marching bands coming by and they'd be playing like the same music a marching band would be playing here.
Okay.
One of the marching bands was playing Queen's A Crazy Little Thing Called Love. So I'm thinking, I flew halfway around the world to see a marching band play Queen. But then a group would come by carrying a gigantic drum like 4 feet across and playing it and like playing all these native instruments. And then a group would come by in the garb of a hill tribe, one of the hill tribe groups. And there were also the typical flower-based floats like you see at the Rose Bowl Parade. And there
Sure.
were tons of these. But of course they had a much different motifs than the ones here would have.
Huh.
And it was kind of neat because there were no barricades up at all. So you're right there on the parade. And like when a float would come by or something, there'd be the guys with the whistles that would come by and whistle and make people back up so that the float could get through.
Oh.
But you could literally reach out and touch the floats. They were that close. 5 minutes after the parade was over, the street was a major street again, carrying traffic.
Interesting.
And then they take all the floats down at the end of the parade and take them down to this big park down in the southwest part of the city. And everybody goes down there to see the floats. And we went down there, and it was like, I think everyone in the city must have been there because it was literally shoulder to shoulder. And, of course, being Thailand, there's food vendors everywhere you go. Anywhere where there's more than one person, there's basically a food vendor. So that was kind of neat. Now, they're all families out having picnics, and it's just kind of a really neat experience. So if anybody wanted to go, I would definitely recommend going to see that.
Okay. What was the biggest surprise?
I think the flower festival parade that I mentioned and how similar it was to a parade in the U.S., but then also how different. And it just kind of gave you a sense of we're all different, but we're all kind of the same,
Mm-hmm.
There's the float with the pretty girl on it, just like you would have here. So it's kind of strange.
Most memorable person you met?
I would say the woman that taught our cooking class.
Oh, that's right. You did the cooking class. We haven't talked about that yet.
Yeah, I haven't talked about that yet. We did this in Chiang Mai. The cooking class is called A Lot of Thai. And you can just Google that if you want to find it. The woman who taught it was named Yui. There are tons of cooking classes in Thailand. It's one of the big things to do, and I also highly recommend taking one. So one of the reasons we picked it had really good ratings on TripAdvisor. And also, it's a very small class. It's taught in her house, so there's a maximum of 8 people that can take it. So I thought that would be kind of fun, kind of more personal. And she was just really fun. She was a really good teacher, and we had a lot of fun. And they kind of pick you up in their VW microbus, which is a little unusual, obviously, in itself in Thailand. And you go to her house, and the way it works is Thai food cooks so fast, she can't really tell you how you're going to do it while you're doing it. So you would kind of gather around her table, and she would show you how to do everything. And then you would go back. Each person had their own wok and their own station. You would make it, and we would all sit around the table and eat it. We'd learn to make 6 different dishes that way. And as part of that, we also went on a tour of a local market, which was very neat. It's a real local market near her house, and it wasn't like a lot of the tourist markets. This was a real market, but we were the only Western people we saw there the whole time we were there. And so she kind of took us through the market and kind of showed us vegetables and showed us some of the things we were cooking and showed us the different properties of them and how to pick them. And then we just got to wander around for a while. And there's obviously a lot of things you don't see at markets in the U.S. Fresh dried squid and 20 different kinds of dried fish. They really use dried seafood in a lot of dishes. And just these amazing fresh vegetables and homemade curry paste and sacks of chicken eggs for sale. And it was just a really neat experience. 10 different varieties of rice, because they have many different varieties of rice there that are used for different things. And it was just kind of neat walking around there and seeing the people shopping and looking at the things. And that's where I bought my spatula that I mentioned. And it was a really fun experience. And the cooking class itself was really, really fun. It was also a really good deal. It's like under $30 a person for basically an all-day cooking class.
Interesting.
Highly recommend people do a cooking class when they're there. It's really fun. It's kind of a really good way to take something home from the culture with you.
Yeah, I'm surprised it hasn't come up as often, because I know that there are definitely places that's a really strong recommendation, that a number of people who've tried that have really enjoyed that. I think Thailand and France and Mexico are places where I can think of people who've done cooking classes and had, like you, a very similarly wonderful experience.
And it's fun to take some knowledge home with you as well.
Mm-hmm. What do you wish you had known before you went?
I think one of the main things is I wish I had known in Bangkok, I think you're really better off if you stay on the river.
Okay.
Because I think it really makes transportation a lot easier. One of our favorite ways to get around, when we were going up to the Grand Palace or something like that, what we would have to do is we would go get on our local SkyTrain station, which was only 3 or 4 or 5 minute walk away from our hotel, which was nice.
Mm-hmm.
We'd get on that, we'd take it down to Central Pier, which was the end of the line, and then we'd get on these river taxis and take those all the way back up the river up to the Grand Palace. And these river taxis are just so awesome. I recommend if anybody goes to Bangkok, you just must ride on these river taxis. They're so fun. It's such a great way because the river taxi pulls up to the pier and they stay there for like no time. You have to be there ready to get on. And everybody rushes onto the boat. And they're pretty long boats. You know, they're 70, 80 feet long. Everybody rushes on and either stands or sits, depending on how many people are on. And then you go, and the piers are numbered North 1, North 2, North 3. And we were usually going from Central Pier up to like North 9. So everybody rushes on, and you're kind of riding on the river, and it's really nice and cool, and you get a beautiful view of the city because it's a very maritime-focused culture. Bangkok was actually called the Venice of the East up until just recently because of the river and all the canals. So everything is focused on the river, including like you get a beautiful view of Wat Arun when you're going by, and some of the really nice old classic hotels like the Oriental are out on the river, of course. And then they stop for like no time. So when you know your stop's coming up, you get up and get ready in the back, ready to jump off the boat as soon as it stops. It's kind of fun as well. And so really I wish I'd known how important it was to stay on the river. I think I would definitely make an effort to stay on the river the next time I went.
Okay. Do you have one picture you took that when you look at that picture, you're back in Thailand?
Probably one of the pictures of us watching the elephants in the river. I think because that was kind of an experience that you're really not going to get anywhere else.
Yep. I could believe
There's
that.
There's a picture of me getting a kiss from the elephant, too, which is kind of unusual.
Huh.
It's like sticking his trunk on my face.
Well, do you have any last thoughts for anybody who's going to do a similar trip to what you just did?
Well, I would recommend if they're thinking about going to Thailand, they should definitely do it. It's a wonderful experience. The people are just very, very friendly. I wouldn't be worried about the language barrier. There are plenty of people that don't speak a lot of English, but it's like I always say, you're going to make it work. It's like I've told friends of mine that were worried about traveling. It's like, they want you to spend your money and you want to buy something, you will find a way to make it work. Don't worry about the language.
That's a good way to put it.
And the people in Bangkok and in Thailand overall, the vendors had a very clever idea. I thought what they would do is every vendor has a calculator. So
Sure.
when you ask them how much something costs, if they don't know how to say it, they just punch the number into the calculator and show it to you.
Yep.
So I thought that was very clever. So I would definitely encourage people to do it. It's a very wonderful culture. It's very unique. It's actually, I didn't know this until I started doing my research, but Thailand is the only country in Southeast Asia that was never colonized by Western power.
Right.
So it's kind of developed its own indigenous culture through the years, fact of which they are justifiably, I think, proud. And it's just a very neat culture and a very wonderful part of the world. So I just recommend if people are thinking about going there, that they should definitely do it and don't be frightened off by the difference in cultures and by the language barrier.
Well, I thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us about your trip. It just really sounds like a very interesting experience, and I'm glad you shared it with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Chris.
I have one internet resource for you today, and that's from my Tripinator travel blog. And that is an article about how to use kayak.com and how to use their trend graphs to pick the right date to go to save yourself a little extra money. So it's an article called Save Money, Know When to Go, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. And I'd like to announce the date for the second Amateur Traveler live show. When I say live, this means live online, although you can come to my house if you want. But what we're going to do is we're going to go on TalkShoe.com again, and people can dial in using your free cell phone minutes or using Skype or some other conference service into TalkShoe and talk to me and a guest. And I'm going to have a guest on this next show, and I'm not going to tell you who it is yet. I'm going to tell you in 2 weeks, and you'll find out in 2 weeks why I'm not going to tell you until then. So mark this date on your calendar, April 12th. It's going to be at noon Pacific time, which is 3 p.m. Eastern time, and in Europe that's going to be about 9 p.m. on April 12th. So put that on your calendar and join me for the live show. And then I've got 2 different letters from listeners I'd like to share. The first one is from Tamar, who writes, I'm a fairly new listener. I discovered your podcast a few weeks ago because I have a new obsession with travel, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I haven't done a lot of traveling so far. I'm only 19, so most of the traveling I've done has been with family trips and school trips, but I have a very strong desire to see the world. It's only recently crossed my mind to do some international volunteer work. Right now, I'm doing national service, which we have in Israel for girls who don't go to the army. The thing was, I didn't know anything about voluntourism, which I didn't know was a word, so I just want to thank you for this week's show. I now realize that voluntourism is an option for me and everyone, so thank you for that. Tamar from Israel. Thank you very much, Tamar, and I'll put a link to Tamar's blog, where hopefully in the future we'll see her post lots of travel stories. I got a letter this week that I wanted to share, and unfortunately I seem to have lost it. But the gist of the letter was a request to do more domestic shows. And I used to mix things up a bit and do more domestic as well as international travel. One, I'm interested in other people, whether you think the mix is right or whether you'd like to see more domestic. And 2, if you'd like to see more domestic, I could use more suggestions for places that we could talk about that are in domestic. Largely because we've done a lot of the places that I had in mind, so I've been finding it harder to find domestic locations. So I'm interested in community feedback and ideas. And my apologies to the person who sent me the letter that I can't find to read, but I still wanted to share it even though I couldn't find the specific letter itself. And of course, now I realize when I say domestic travel, I should specify because about 30% of the listeners are outside the United States. Since I'm in the United States, when I was saying domestic, I meant travel within the United States. With that, we will wrap up this show. I hope to talk to a number of you on April 12th at the live show. I hope to hear from you in email, host@amateurtraveler.com, or find out the many ways to contact me at amateurtraveler.com/contact. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe.